why boundaries. Yeah, why do we need boundaries? Within ourselves, we want to be calm and settled, balanced.
I really have a thin boundary, a thin heart where I spend a lot of time in my head thinking about how they could fix their problems. But I'm not really doing that for myself, right?
Prentice's definition of boundaries is the distance at which I can love both you and me simultaneously. Welcome, friends, to the Reiki Women podcast, an exploration into the profound depths of the system of Reiki from a Japanese spiritual perspective and how that relates to our modern lives.
We are keeping it real to Reiki's origins, challenging the New Age stereotype that things like crystals, chakras, and angels are authentic aspects of the system. I'm Bronwen Logan, and when I'm not writing best-selling books about the Japanese system of Reiki, 75,000 readers and counting, I'm here debunking outmoded Reiki myths and coaching individuals and groups through my website, Reiki with Bronwen.
And I'm Michaela Daystar, lead teacher and weaver of Heartscapes Reiki, connecting the dots between Reiki and environmental and social justice, because our individual healing cannot be extracted from healing relationship with the collective and with the land.
And I'm Carrie Varela from the Reiki Healing Society, here to help you transform your Reiki practice into a thriving, prosperous business. Because while passion fuels your purpose, it's time to make it sustainable, authentic, and beautifully you. We're three women diving into the heart of Japanese Reiki. We're building a community that centers women's voices and inspires well-being. We're not just for women, we're for everybody. Come join the conversation. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Reiki Women podcast. We are so excited to be returning back to our regular scheduled programming. We have been extensively sharing these interviews that we compiled for a series we call Radiance, interviews on women's health and Reiki. And we really hope that you enjoyed our series and all of the conversations that we had. And so we thought today it might be kind of cool to reflect on what we learned from the interviews that we shared through Radiance and reflect on some of the common themes that we saw that kind of threaded through all of the interviews. And reflecting back on it, it just seemed kind of like boundaries. Boundaries was the big theme that came through in all of the conversations we had in different ways and different facets in the Radiant series. And so we thought it might be kind of cool and a little journey to talk about what we learned from, hearing and listening to all these incredible other Reiki practitioners talk about, something that really motivates them in their Reiki practice and in their work. So we hope that you got a lot out of that Radiance series if you haven't checked it out. The 5 amazing interviews. We talked about Reiki and recovery. We talked about Reiki for burnout. We talked about Reiki for people pleasing. We talked about Reiki in relationship to food and body image. And then we talked about a really fiery topic. If you got a chance to listen to one, I mean, all of them were so good. But I mean, come on, Elise's was just like fire. We talked all about patriarchy and colonization and how that impacts women's identity. So check out those episodes if you haven't. And so today though, we're going to be focusing in on boundaries. Our cats are joining us for the conversation today. And I'd love for you to start, Michaela. What are your reflections on the Radiant series and what do you think about boundaries?
Yeah. It was really interesting how quickly that theme really rose to the surface when we reflected on the conversations that we got to have with these practitioners and the way that they weave Reiki into, really meaningful work that they're doing in the world and other realms. And so, as I was kind of thinking about how boundaries show up in my own experience with Reiki, there were, several themes that where I can see that theme happening. So I wanted to just kind of start by like framing, where we might talk about boundaries in the context of Reiki. And then, yeah, we'll kind of see how that weaves in with the Radiance series. So, for me, it came up in several places. There's boundaries certainly around the logistics of our businesses and the way that we interact with people, the way that we kind of frame our Reiki practice, how we keep clarity in the relationships between ourselves and our clients, how we keep ourselves and them safe in terms of that working relationship around something that is a business offering, that is a in a certain sense a transactional relationship, but of course in a very real sense is also a very intimate relationship, in terms of the nature of the work that we provide. And so having professional boundaries is an important thing, and that's something that we've touched on in other conversations, around the nature of our relationships with our students and our clients, and how we might navigate when those lines get blurry. So there's that piece. There's, our boundaries with our own self and our own time. How do we take good care of ourselves? How do we prevent burnout, which was the topic of one of our conversations in Radiance? How do we use the experience of setting boundaries, the capacity, really, right? The skill. It's an emotional skill. It's also a logistical skill, right? How do we, like, what specifically do we say no to? Do we say yes to? Do we compromise on? Where we set that line and in what way? How do we honor the precepts in doing that? For example, having compassion for ourselves as well as the people with whom we are navigating boundaries. So boundaries with ourselves in respect to taking good care of ourselves, honoring ourselves in relationship to our Reiki practice and our Reiki clients is a really important one, and one that was really on my mind when we were having the conversation about preventing burnout. And then there's this really the one the one that makes me most interested, the one that feels like it has the most like esoteric charm to it, and also that is really quite challenging, is setting boundaries within the practice of Reiki itself, in particular the way in which we practice it from the perspective of its origins. When I was practicing in the more Western traditions, there's a lot of techniques and conversation around setting boundaries, around energy, right? Around how to protect ourselves from other people's energy, how not to give our energy to that person or take on negative energy that we don't want from another person, how to separate ourselves from them. So energetic boundaries. And then of course, things like consent and making sure we have consent to provide sessions for folks. That's very clear when we're talking about a hands-on session, right? We need consent to touch people, generally speaking, especially in a professional relationship. It gets more murky when we're talking about distance Reiki or Reiki with somebody who is not able to consent because of, they're, passed out, or they're not with us. We can't communicate with them and so on. So those kinds of boundaries are something that's really fascinating to me. It's a conversation that always comes up for me with my students in classes when we talk about interconnection, energetically and philosophically, coming from the Buddhist roots of Reiki, and we look at that distinction between, our relative reality of our life, our day-to-day life, and then our ultimate reality of being one with all life. There's different ways to look at boundaries in those two perspectives, and how do we hold that in our Reiki practice, allow ourselves to feel empowered, to feel safe, to feel like we are in control of our own energy field and we don't have things coming in that we don't want to come in, and at the same time allow ourselves to benefit from the practice of really feeling that interconnection with all of life. And as always comes up in that conversation, when we're interconnecting with all of life, we're interconnecting with people that we might feel very averse to and very much not want to feel connected to. So, there's murky territory there. There's challenging and sometimes painful territory when we think about boundaries in that way. So I'm really excited for this conversation today, and just kind of see where it goes, and to reflect back on where this subject came up in our conversations with Radiance. So that's where I'm going to start, just kind of giving us a an overview of how we might think about boundaries. And I'd
Mm.
love to know, Bronwyn, what came up for you, where your mind went when this topic came up, and where you saw boundaries coming up in our conversations through Radiant.
Yeah, thanks, Michaela. So I think if I'm looking at all those ideas about boundaries and all those places where we need to consider them, I guess my first thought is why boundaries? Yeah, why do we need boundaries? And if we're thinking about ourselves, I think that comes back to this idea that within ourselves, we want to be calm and settled, balanced. So, this is the place, the ultimate place to be. And it's where, when we're practicing the system of Reiki, that's where it takes us. I recently did a web class on working with the Hara, and I have all these quotes about the Hara. And it's interesting because they can really inform this conversation. If I think of the Hara, there's a lot of sayings. I mean, we have in the English language a lot of sayings about the gut, yeah, but there are way more in Japanese language about that area of the body. And they tell us so much about ourselves and what it means to live in an ideal way. And that is exactly what I was just saying. So to be calm, to be settled, to feel balanced. And the hara is the key as far as the Japanese people are concerned in their culture. And because we practice a Japanese practice, we can bring that in for us. And I think it can be a really enlightening aspect to understand a little better. So there's a lot of quotes about, the calmness, to be calm in the hara. And also a lot of quotes about to be set, determined, resolute in the hara. But the ones that I think are probably the most important here are about something called a thick hara. So it's said that it's good to have a thick hara, right? And it mightn't sound so attractive to have a thick hara, but it's meant to be good for you. So to have a thick hara means that you're strong and you can hold this space, yeah? But then there is another one, and it says that you can have two thicker hara, right? And that is when we don't really understand what boundaries are. So we don't know, are we being too close, not too close? So if we have a thick hara, we are generous, we're kind, we're benevolent, we're tolerant, yeah? But if we have too thick a hara, then we are no longer tolerant. We are no longer generous. So it can go either way, more or less, but it's saying that we don't have this balanced space inside of ourselves. If we're looking at boundaries, I think that can really help inform us as to why we want to have boundaries. And if anything, I see this idea of a thick hara as having common sense. And those things that you were just talking about, Michaela, people saying, oh, but don't I need permission to do Reiki on someone who's dying? Right. And maybe that person who's dying can't speak. So I'm not going to do Reiki on that person because they haven't given me permission. Okay, well, step back. Take a bit of common sense. What is the system of Reiki? So, what is that? And it's about being with each other, interconnected. As you said, being open, being loving, being generous, being kind. These are things that are beautiful, beautiful things to share. And sure, some people may not want to be involved in a practice like Reiki or something like that. And in that sense, then once again, we use our common sense and we go, okay, well, I'm not going to do something that is against someone else's values because that's not kind or loving or giving. So we just need to use our common sense, and having this really lovely, strong hara is going to actually help us with that. Another thing that I thought about in relation to this subject, which I really loved, which is this idea that we were talking about in the horror class that I did, but also in my online coaching group. And that was about Mikao Usui's posthumous name. And that is the name that he has been given by a Buddhist priest after he died. And the beginning of that starts with Sacred Mountain. So they called him a sacred mountain. And to me, that is everything that I would love to be. I would love to be this strong, grounded. Can you think of the base of a mountain? And it doesn't finish there, it goes into the earth. And it's a part of the earth, it's interconnected. It's this strong force. And often when we talk about the hara, we talk about this strength. So it is strong and it's supportive and it's giving. It's all these wonderful things that I think we can learn from and support in our own lives. I think if we work within the system of Reiki, need to just step back from all these rules and the rules that humans have put on top of everything. And we need to step back into our common sense, step back into our hara, work on ourselves, feel that balance, that common sense. Common sense is when the mind sits in the hara, and just work from that space, be in that space, feel balanced and calm and grounded. And then we know what the right thing to do is. I solved it.
Got it all figured out there, Bronwen. Well, Bronwen, you should be running the show.
The whole show.
The whole show. Oh, boundaries. I don't think I have mastered boundaries in this life or any life. And yeah, that just was a big theme. Thank you for your reflections, Bronwen and Michaela. I think that was cool how we kind of tried to bring it, boundaries, bring some structure and into what, is really that's the conversation is how do we both be in the understanding that we're all one, that we're all interconnected. And one of my yoga teachers always talks about how yoga is the practice that blurs the line between you and me. And I think that's a beautiful thing, but too much blurring. And one might get a little lost and a sense of self gets distorted, right? Where we're not in our body. We're not in our lane. We're not, putting effort towards what's in our own best interest. And that's when boundaries can get really fuzzy. And that's something that I think I've really struggled with. And I think a lot of people struggle with, who love Reiki and practice Reiki, because more than likely we're empathic beings. We're people who are oriented towards wanting to help others. And maybe you've seen this floating around, and it's something that's really important to think about but like the more we trying to help others, the more we are kind of neglecting that part of ourselves that needs help too, right? Which we orient like, oh, I'm going to help everybody else, but I'm not helping myself. And so I think boundaries is like a healthy scoop of helping yourself. So, you talked about Bronwen, that thicker hara. I think it's like being able to come back to oneself. And I think that boundaries, why it can be hard for somebody like myself, and I'll just speak for myself, is that sometimes I feel like everybody else is piled on top of me. Everybody else's problems. I really have a thin boundary, a thin hara where I kind of just absorb their emotions, what's going on in their life, and spend a lot of time in my head thinking about how they could fix their problems, how I could tell them to fix their problems. But I'm not really doing that for myself, right? I'm not spending time in my mind thinking about my own problems. What are those? And how am I directing my energy to solving my own stuff, because yes, it's true that, we help each other in this life, but we really have to help ourselves. And I think that's why healing, one of the big words that's been coming up for me is healing is a self-identified and self-directed process. So you could talk to a therapist for literally years if you wanted to. And you could not take any of their advice. You know, they would just be a sounding board for you to just talk, 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 and, you know, dump all of your stuff on them. But really, when we start to take in the insight and the wisdom around us, and we grab onto it and say, actually, that's my medicine for today. Like, I needed that message, and I need to identify that that is something that I could work on in order to help myself right now, to better myself, to better my situation, to have a little bit of a thicker boundary around me, because when we don't have boundaries, we are stuck in people pleasing. It might come out as a substance abuse disorder, because, or you know, a form of recovery from really anything, right? Because this neglected part of ourselves needs to self-soothe. It needs the time and attention that we're not giving it. And so that can kind of manifest in a lot of really painful ways. Um, you know, people pleasing. Jay talked about people pleasing. This is just like the complete epitome of having loose boundaries. And inside of that, what I got from that conversation was, you know, when we're people pleasing, we're not assured of our own self worth. So we're trying to get self worth from anyone else. And when we can't hold that vibration for ourselves, then of course, maybe we do get that. I'm not thinking of the right word, but that affirmation from other people here and there. But if we can't hold on to it, you know, that's that loose boundary. That's just when like things come in and they come out, and we can't self-identify. We can't grasp onto something and say, "That's for me. I need that." Like I'm, you know, like a tree, kind of taking in sunlight or taking in the elements. Like I need this to, you know, grow my tree stronger. Um, it really comes back. I mean, all of us, it can be confusing as mothers, as partners, you know, as in friendships and in business and all of these things. Of course, what we're doing for others matters, but we also have to have like one eye on what we're doing for ourselves and where we're growing, because um, we can't take it with when we go, right? I mean, as much as we are all interconnected, at some point we are going to leave this life and we're going to die, and nobody's coming with us on that journey. It's just ourselves. So I think, um, you know, I think, and I'd be curious. I'm curious how many, you know, people who identify as healers or empaths also have, and I don't want to like throw stones or anything like this, but like have autoimmune disorders, because like we're just directing so much of our energy towards other people, and we aren't focusing on ourselves. So anyways, one of my practices that I've been doing lately is just when I'm in my meditative space, when I'm in my Reiki space, it's like really trying to direct like all of my skills and gifts and healing. I'm trying to direct it in towards myself and trying not to project it out so much to other people, but trying to preserve time that's just really for me. How do I strengthen me? How do I build a stronger me? Um, and that's not easy. It's really not easy for me. I mean, and I've yeah, really started to recognize that I put a lot on of you know, my work. I don't congratulate myself as much as I want to, and I don't acknowledge myself as much as I want to, because it feels kind of arrogant or egotistical. But it's really about building that strong sense of self and
Mm.
not seeking validation or acknowledgement from other people as much to help support or bolster up one's self-esteem. Um, but you know, and just thinking about in our day-to-day interactions in life, I mean, And for everybody listening, like, how much time of your day do you spend helping other people, in some fashion, some way? And then how much time are you, helping yourself? And it might be interesting to just reflect on that, equation. I'll be thinking about that this week. And then I guess it kind of comes back to, one of Marla's things that I think really came home for me is like once you have a stronger sense of self, and like you can be like, oh yeah, that's Carrie right here. This is my little bubble. This is my little world that I'm living in. And how do I clarify what's around me and how I think and what my relationship is like with myself? Like that's when you can really shift your relationship with yourself. Like you can change the way you talk to your body. You can change the way you relate to your food and nourishment. And if, let's say, for example, you have a poor sense of self, maybe there's a feeling like you can't nourish yourself, like you can't take good care of yourself because there's an underlying real need for self-esteem. So I got a lot from that conversation, and I guess Elise, I mean, the big theme that's coming up for me is how do I build a stronger me? How do I build a stronger me? And what am I putting my energy into? And am I doing that on a regular basis? Putting my energy into me. It's not self-serving. It's not egotistical. It's an intrinsic need we all have. To self-identify and be more in touch with oneself. Um, and I think then we can serve people deeply. Then we can really see like, oh, and hold space and share space. And I know for me, sometimes I just have so much going on. I have an ADD brain, sitting down in meditation. It's like, I got so many things spinning in my head. It takes a little while to settle into a quieter space. And I've been talking a lot, but like that we have, like maybe in that quieter space, like the clients that we're really serving and want to serve well and deeply and support in their healing, we can hold that better, and it comes from a pure place when we can do that for ourselves because we're modeling what they're going to need to do for themselves too. So those are some of my thoughts on boundaries, and I know we're going to shift the conversation just a little bit for all of us listening. We've kind of been doing some more back end parts of this podcast, and we always want to leave a little space in our podcast to talk more about what's going on in our business. So, we produce this podcast completely for free. We don't get paid to do any of this, and so it's important for us to, give time and give this platform a little space to talk about what's going on in our lives. So, Michaela, do you want to talk about what's your big thing you're working on professionally here?
Yeah, I love this conversation. There's a quote that's coming up really strongly for me as I listen to the two of you talk about boundaries, and it kind of also brings to mind the one of the offerings that I have coming up that I'd love to let folks know about. It's an offering that is really dear to my heart, one that I offer once a year, and it's a deep dive into the Book of Joy. The class is called Embodied Joy, a 10-week journey through the Book of Joy. And it really brings together, practices from the system of Reiki and also practices from some of the origins of Reiki through the Tibetan lineage of the Dalai Lama, who is one half of the teachings in the Book of Joy, and then the Archbishop Desmond Tutu being the other half of the teachings in the Book of Joy. And this book has been really a point of guidance for my life and my practice for a very long time, and it's so beautifully set up for us to work through together. And so in this class, we walk through the 8 obstacles that they have identified as being in the way of living a life that is rooted in joy. They really bring to the forefront what I believe to be true, which is that when we live from our hara, when we live from our true self, that is an inherently joyful existence. That joy is not dependent on what's happening in and around us. It is part of our true self. It is part of who we are, just as love is. And yet there are so many things that get in the way of us actually feeling it, embodying it, being connected to it consciously, especially when times are difficult, when we're being challenged. So they've identified 8 obstacles to living from our joyful center, and then 8 pillars of joy, the things that we want to cultivate in our life to, support, to be that foundation, that sacred mountain that Bronwen spoke of an embodied joyful life. And so it's just such delicious work. And we walk through it in great detail in this class. And that class will be coming up next month. And you can find it on my website, which will be linked down below. So Bronwen, what's coming up for you?
Well, first, I have a question. Is it online?
It is online. Yes, thank you for asking. It's a completely online class, so you can join from anywhere in the world.
I might join you this year. That sounds like a beautiful thing to do. All right. Well, I would just like to remind people about some of my regular classes that I have. So it's not something unusual or new, but I do a regular Reiju every Friday in Australia, Thursday in the rest of the world, and it's 15 minutes out of your week. And it's such a special time where we come together and I do Reiju. Um, we sit there in that space, we sit there in that healing space together. We come out of our life into that 15 minutes, then we go back into our life, and it is transformational. I find it transformational. I know the students who attend do as well. It's online, and I would love to see you there. So you should come join me. You'll find the link on my website. How about you, Carrie?
Oh, thanks, Bronwen. I attend your weekly reissue. I often get the recording because I have a conflict right now when it's being offered, but I absolutely love it. And it's my little 15-minute tune in. So I love it. So definitely join into that if you can. So what's up for me in my life professionally right now is I'm teaching a Reiki course, and I have a few Reiki courses on the horizon. So got a Reiki level 1 course happening this weekend. So depending on when this podcast comes out, it might be already passed, but you can always sign up for my interest list, wait list for my upcoming courses. And if you haven't studied Reiki from the origins of Japanese Reiki, I mean, it is a whole different world of understanding Reiki, understanding the nature of energy and how the Japanese understood it, the map of the subtle body. I mean, there's so many things, little nuances, and then of course some lovely similarities as well. But yeah, if you love Reiki, you really owe it to yourself to just take a course from really any one of us. I'm sure they're all very lovely, but I know we all have, our special little things that we add to our training. So, yeah, that's kind of big in my world. And then I have a couple creative projects. So I guess the other big one is really supporting other Reiki practitioners with their rates. I have a whole course that's designed to look at your rates from all these different angles and support you with some spreadsheets that help you keep track of your business finances. That's going to be coming out very soon. And I'm also going to be creating some more packages about, diving into life purpose and utilizing Reiki in that, and also Vedic astrology and some other cool things. So, yeah, some other cool things are on the horizon. So thanks for listening in to what we've got going on. Would anyone like maybe just let's touch back into boundaries just a little bit more, and then we'll wrap up our topic for today. So, Michaela, have you any other lingering thoughts about boundaries you want to talk about?
Yeah, I wanted to share the quote that was really strong on my mind listening to both of you talk, and it's from Prentice Hemphill, who's an embodiment teacher and a liberation theologist and an author, and just a really amazing teacher in the realm of bringing embodiment-based work and liberation work and anti-oppression work together. And their book. Is What It Takes to Heal. And Prentice's definition of boundaries is the distance at which I can love both you and me simultaneously. So it's the distance at which I can love both you and me simultaneously. And, I think immediately of our fifth precept, right? Having compassion for myself and for others. And, some of again, those challenging conversations that I often have with students when they kind of wrestle with that, when they think about, people in their lives or people out in the world that feel really dangerous to them, that feel harmful to them, that have maybe caused harm to them or that are, causing harm out in the world, whether that be political leaders or, just people who are, out there running amok and causing difficulty and harm and pain and suffering. How do I love both me and them simultaneously? And like, how do I lean into interconnection with people like that, right? This is a question that's so valid and so legitimate when we're thinking about it. And it's really, one of the reasons that we see in Western Reiki a lot of this kind of putting barriers up between me and you, in ways that can feel really empowering and at the same time distance us from the way in which Reiki was originally conceived and practiced from its origins, which of course the three of us are really committed to. And so it's a real, it can be a real point of tension. And so I love this idea that there is a space, right? There's a space that has a particular contour to it, has a particular size, and it's the space in which I can love both you and me simultaneously. I think about the conversation we had with Elise around patriarchy and oppressive systems, where, we are talking about systems that are, kind of meta as far as being beyond the individual people involved. But then, if we boil it down to our individual lives, those systems are being enacted by people. And, again, how do we love them and me simultaneously, when I might be getting harmed by the systems that are being upheld, and that I, as a member of society, am also upholding in significant ways, in very real ways that I may or may not be aware of. So how can I love others and myself inside of systems that are designed inherently to harm certain types of people and not others? These are complex things, but if we come down to the simplicity of having a strong hara, as Bronwen so beautifully spoke of, and that I love that idea of the thick hara and like finding the right thickness, right? Not so thick that I'm now barriered against loving you because I've closed myself into this space that's so boundaried, that's so protected and so thick that I can't touch you, I can't feel my connection to you. Conversely, it's so thin that I'm permeating into you and I'm not able to love myself in the way that Carrie was speaking of so beautifully. I'm not able to, tend to my needs and I'm overgiving and I'm, my boundaries are just too, loose and leaky and I'm not able to, really differentiate my own needs. So I think it's such a valuable, concept, certainly, but more importantly, practice to work with our embodied sense of what it feels like to be in a space where I can love me and you simultaneously, even if the you that we're speaking of is somebody who's incredibly challenging. And I know from my practice, right? I'm not speaking of this hypothetically. This is part of my practice. It's a significant part of my work with Reiki. I don't work with it all the time, but periodically and regularly, I really intentionally go into a Reiki-based meditation where I am intentionally finding my place of connection with somebody, usually a specific person, sometimes a group of people that I find very challenging, that I feel very averse to, that I might have a lot of anger towards or fear towards or, rage towards even. People that I feel are harmful to myself or to others, and really, see if I can find that space where I can love them and me simultaneously. And sometimes I can't, as you said, Carrie, I am also not a master of boundaries. Sometimes I can't, and that's okay. That is perfectly okay. Because part of setting boundaries in the spiritual sense in our practice involves the fact that we get to have a choice of where we put our attention. Are we going to choose to put our attention on connecting with somebody that we feel that way about? Or are we going to not choose that today because it's not what's going to be good for me today? That's part of how we can set boundaries in our practice while still respecting that this tradition holds that we're connected with those people, whether or not we pay attention to it. But we do have a choice on whether or not we focus there. But other times, and more often than not, and increasingly more often than not, because hey, practice makes us stronger, I am able to find that place and I'm able to meet those people that I feel harmed by or I feel afraid of in this space where I can love them and me simultaneously. And my hara is the right amount of thickness that can hold that space. And in that moment, what I realize is that when we talk about being interconnected and all life being connected, that is a hara to hara connection, right? It's not necessarily a connection in the relative reality of our daily life, right? In my daily life, I might need to say, this person needs to get right out of my life and not talk to me ever again. That is the boundary that I need to have with this person, or we need to have very limited contact. And that's what's right and good and safe in my daily life, in the relative reality of my daily life. At the same time, in the ultimate reality of, of Reiki, of the universe, of spiritual energy, of an enlightened perspective on life. And I don't mean by that I am enlightened. I just mean holding a mindset of interconnection and so on. I can acknowledge that connection with that connection with that person is always true, and that it's a hara to hara, a true self to true self connection, a clean connection. It's one that is not actually touched by the harmful things they have done or the harmful things I have done or the conflict between us or the aversion or the distance or the arguments or any of that, the disagreements, any of it. That connection exists. It always does. And I have a choice whether or not I put my attention on that. And some days I don't want to. Some days it's not good for me to focus on that. Other days it is. So that's one of the places that my mind went, and I was having similar reflections when we were in that conversation with Elise, such a powerful conversation, the final interview in the Radiance series, around being in our Reiki practice with a mindset towards understanding systems of oppression that are the water that we are floating in, the air that we breathe in many senses of the word, and how can we be our full and true self inside of that reality. So yeah, that's what came so strongly when I listened to the two of you, this beautiful definition of boundaries from Prentice Hemphill, that boundaries are the distance at which I can love both you and me simultaneously.
Mm. Yeah, what a beautiful, beautiful saying. Yeah, it's very tender and touches something very true, right? Yeah, I love it. And all those things that you just spoke about, I can see we haven't been around for a while because we haven't. I find it lovely to listen to you guys today. It's just so nice to sit back and I could just be the little audience member here listening to you both. It's really beautiful. And I've forgotten how much I enjoyed that. So thank you. All those things that you just said, Michaela, there was a lot that came up when we're thinking about this other being or whatever it is that we might be or have been in conflict with and don't know how to be with. I think, yeah, you're right. That is so real to our experience in our world and the people that we've met in our lives and the societies that we've lived in, the communities, whatever, politically. And just a note on this, next week we're going to be political, apparently. Can't wait. Us and everything and everyone else around us and how we are with that is very interesting. And sometimes I feel like you try to convince yourself that you're okay with things. And sometimes it can be really patronizing. Sometimes it can be like, oh, well, they're just like, and we start to judge these other people as we try to deal with who they are and who we are. Coming back to some of the Japanese principles, firm and flexible. Sometimes we need to be firmer, sometimes we need to be more flexible, and we have to feel into that. We have to know that. And that is that inner intuitive self, that it allows us to know what is right or wrong in those moments. And it's not about what the other person is telling you is right or wrong in those moments. It's about what you know is right or wrong in those moments. And we really need to sit into that and have that inner wisdom, allow that inner wisdom out from within. For me, that's so empowering when I get it right, and when I get it wrong, it's a learning thing. So I guess both ways go well. I love that the challenges sometimes of that, and it's like, so do I stand up in this moment? Do I take the firm in this moment, or do I take the flexible in this moment? And when I do it, and I know inside myself it's right, then the rest of the world falls away in that moment. Finding that in our lives, that balance, that calmness of the hara, yeah, is really important. One other thing was that I was just thinking this morning, I was just sitting in meditation this morning, thinking about thinking, because that's what you do, right? Because it's like, oh, I'm thinking, should I be thinking right now? And and I thought, so many people are always telling me in my mind, because I set it up that way, this is what meditation is. This is what meditation is. This is what meditation is. Or this is what my practice is. Yeah. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking about things, but actually, this is really beneficial what I'm thinking about in this moment, because I'm actually sitting in calm and quiet, and it's really helping me. And this is my flexible moment. So, this is where I'm not going to be like, this is how it has to be. And I actually give to myself those moments, and don't try to enforce some fake boundaries that shouldn't even exist there, and really just live my life according to what is the right thing for me in this moment. And it was a lovely moment of enlightenment for me, because I thought I'm always trying to do the right thing. It should be like this, it should be like that, and instead just allowing that to slide and to be there just for myself was really beautiful. And so, if we can bring that in more and more into our lives, I think we can experience joy and awe and sit back into that natural feeling of being human in this world. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that quote that you shared, Michaela. So beautiful. And um, yeah, the firm and flexible as well. I mean, those are just words to live by, right? I mean, they help us so much, and it's so helpful to have those words to lean into when we're uncertain. Um, and Yeah, I don't know what I want to round this out on. And just say that boundaries are okay. You know, it's okay to have boundaries. It's really important. It's really important to set those boundaries. And if we're not very good at it, then they can feel really harsh. And I think there's a quote out there that's like, you know, my boundaries don't have to be like an electric wire fence. You know, keep crossing. You know, um, but that is kind of how they are, right? To some degree. So we got to recognize when maybe our own boundaries have been crossed, and when we've crossed other people's boundaries as well. How we can take those mindful steps back, and learn from it, you know. But sometimes, you know, when people are perpetual boundary crossers, you know, the boundary is you take the wire bolt and cut, you know, like you got to get those people out of our lives too. And that's a healthy thing to do as well. And I think something that I've been reflecting on kind of came to me intuitively was just that, you know, we can trust somebody's true nature, you know, and we should be aware of when we're working with people that we actually do know their true nature, and their true nature kind of is just effervescent. It's, you know, who they are, you know, and we can't change who other people are, nor should we try to change ourselves. You know, we should be able to have that boundary, enough boundaries so that we can be ourselves, be our true self. Um, And I'm just thinking, there's so many healthy ways we can enact the right boundaries. Where do you clear the space for you? Where do you clear the space for your self-care? Are there the right boundaries financially? How are we working with those boundaries with our clients? How do we share space too? How do we bring people in? And when I'm teaching a class or anything, I want to feel that, I want to share that warmth that we're all here in the space together, and there's something really beautiful about that, but we don't have to stay there the whole time. So yeah, those are things I think that are just kind of flowing through me as I think about this. And I'm sure I'll take this conversation, I'll take these conversations we had with Radiance with me for always. I feel like I learned so much from them. I'll probably reflect back on them, listen to them again. So um, thanks for everyone who's listening to our show and made it all the way through to the end. And we would love, love, love to hear from you. Well, first of all, how was Radiance for you? What did you learn? What did you take away from that series? Would you like us to do it again? We'd love to hear your feedback. Would you like to be a part of it maybe next time if we do another series? So feel free to reach out and let us know if you'd like to submit an interview or work on an interview with us. And then tell us a little bit more about your boundaries. How has boundaries been for you? Do you feel like you've mastered your boundaries? Are you still working on it? Has it been something that you've really learned? And how has it changed your life for the better when you put the right boundaries in place? So keep the conversation going. Let's keep the conversation going. And like Bronwen alluded to, we're going to dive into politics next week. And so I'm sure that will be a very juicy conversation. So big love to all of you. Thank you so much for being a part of our community and part of this gorgeous podcast. We can't wait to have another conversation with you soon. Have a gorgeous day.